Chapter 172. In this world, there are a lot of things that people see on the surface, and then take it for granted that what is going to happen next. Or, just by looking at a person's appearance, behavior, and movement, they conclude that this person's nature is what it is. Many times they are wrong. An ugly person is not necessarily evil, and a beautiful appearance is not necessarily pure. Those who are loyal to righteousness always come from the generation of dog butchers. Those who are unfaithful are mostly scholars. In the mortal world, whenever people see one or two beautiful men or women, they will be infatuated and intoxicated, falling head over heels in love with them, thinking that there is nothing their beloved isn't beautiful in every way. And in the Xiaoxian world, there is no exception. There are always many people who revere and admire the high-level cultivators. Looking at those high and mighty figures, they think that the legendary Jin Dan Friar, Yuanying Zhenren, and even the deity transformation stage Zhenren are omnipotent. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is simply human nature. We are too weak, so we are used to looking up at the tall and mighty. We cannot see the tall and mighty's shadow clearly, so we think that the shadow is as tall as a mountain, or even as tall as the sky and the earth. But we forget that everything we see comes from our own vision and vision. When we cannot see too far ahead, we use illusions to fill our own expectations. Su Qingjun is a young genius. At her age, someone who has cultivated to the Jin Dan realm has never appeared in the long history of the Kunlun party. And because of this, almost everyone has high hopes for her, believing that she will become a great person in the future. She was a genuine prodigy, and her talent in cultivation was outstanding. Countless people, especially the disciples whose cultivation is lower than hers, view her as an idol. They revere and admire her, looking up to her as a role model, thinking that she is omnipotent. Unfortunately, the truth is not like this. In this world, the person who understands Su Qingjun the most, naturally, is none other than herself. Of course, Su Qingjun knows that she is not the kind of perfect and omnipotent person that other people imagine her to be. She even clearly knows that she has many shortcomings, and there are many things that she cannot do. However, no one would purposely expose their weaknesses to the public. She was not a saint. In the end, she was just an ordinary mortal. She would feel joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. She would have many concerns and restraints. She even had to consider more things than an ordinary person. This was because in the past, she had to take care of many more people than an ordinary person. Like all geniuses or those who are loved and revered by others, Su Qingjun instinctively hides all of her shortcomings. In order to hide these traces, she would often turn into a calm, cold, beautiful, and aloof appearance. This effect is tried and true. Those who admire her are distanced from her by her actions. They cannot really get close to her. It is as if their eyes can only look at her figure from afar. So what they see in their eyes is a blurry shadow. So they cannot see the truth. So none of them can see the true appearance of that person. So everyone begins to imagine her to be exceptionally beautiful, turning her into the legendary omnipotent and peerless fairy. Just like countless similar things in the world. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is just human nature. But what is fake is not real. What is impossible will never be true. Like a thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water, it will be pierced by reality. That day, Su Qingjun feels like she is that thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water. When she intimidates the Su family and chases away everyone, including her mother Madame Bai, she brings Lu Chen back to Fian Tai in Kunlun Mountain. The momentum of that moment, the awe-inspiring presence, the resolute words, and the sharp words all make her look so perfect. Even the seriously injured Lu Chen admires her. Until, after she returns to the mountain, she helps Lu Chen back to the hut, and puts him down on the bed. Looking at this man who is covered in blood, Su Qingjun panics. Because she does not know how to treat injuries. This was a method that many cultivators, even low-level cultivators with low cultivation, and even rogue cultivators were very familiar with, but she didn't know how to do it. Su Qingjun hurriedly brings out a lot of bottles and jars from the cave, which are filled with all kinds of precious herbs and elixirs. Then she looks at Lu Chen who has countless wounds all over his body, and is dumbfounded. As a proud daughter of heaven from a noble family, When has she ever needed to personally deal with this kind of thing? But seeing the urgency of the matter, Su Qingjun does not care too much, and can only do whatever she wants. Therefore, those precious medicinal powders and elixirs are casually smeared on Lu Chen's wounds. She does not know if they have any effect, but the bleeding does stop very quickly. Su Qingjun is immediately happy, and then she grabs a few bottles of famous Kunlun elixirs and stuffs them into Lu Chen's mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Lu Chen, who was pretending to be asleep, coughs violently. He quickly reaches out to block Su Qingjun's medicine bottle, and then weakly says, "Don't worry, I won't die for a while. Let's not talk about whether you can cure me like this. I always feel that I might choke to death." Su Qingjun glares at him and says, "I am kind enough to give you elixirs, but you talk too much. Are you going to eat it or not?" Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and says, "I have to, but can I eat it later? Besides, I can't eat so many elixirs at once, or else the medicinal effects will backfire, and it will be no different from poison." Su Qingjun snorts, seems to know that she is a little too hasty, and puts the jade bottles on the table beside her, and says, "You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. I'll leave those things here, you can eat them yourself later. Anyway, you are a mysterious person, and I don't know where you come from. You know a lot of things, and you should know these things, right?" Lu Chen shook his head with some difficulty, and says there's no such thing. Su Qingjun sighs and presses down on his hand, and says, "All right, I was just saying casually you should rest quickly." After saying that, she pauses for a moment, and her voice becomes a little deeper. She also lowers her head and says, "This time, you have really suffered a lot. I really didn't expect that my younger brothers at home would be so deranged." A faint glimmer of light flashes in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, and then he says, "This has nothing to do with you, don't think too much." Su Qingjun still wants to say something, but at this moment suddenly, a voice comes from outside the thatched hut, and someone suddenly shouted, "Little June, come out." Su Qingjun is startled and she stands up and looks a little surprised and says, "My master is here, and he ran over at this time. What is he doing?" Lu Chen lies on the bed and smiles, and says, "Probably to help someone plead for leniency?" Su Qingjun thinks for a moment, and says, "It's not very likely, my master loves me very much, but he is not very kind to the Su family. In the past, he always told me that those younger brothers and sisters at home are too troublesome, and that I should not be with them." Halfway through her words, Su Qingjun suddenly stops, and Lu Chen says with a smile, "Was he right?" Su Qingjun sighs with a bitter smile, and then she says in a low voice, "You lie here and rest for a while, I'll be back soon." Walking out of the door of the thatched hut, Su Qingjun sees Masato Kihara standing on the Flying Goose Terrace, about 15 feet away from the thatched hut. After seeing her walk out, Masato Kihara also nods in acknowledgement. Su Qingjun quickly walks up to him and says, "Master, why are you here?" Masato Kihara laughs mischievously and says, "I heard you were in the limelight in Kunwa City, and when you returned to the Su family, you made a big fuss, and the whole Kunlun mountain is in an uproar, so I hurried over to take a look." Su Qingjun blushes and she shakes her head and says, "It's not as exaggerated as you say." Masato Kihara chuckles, but he doesn't tease this female disciple anymore. Instead, he glances at the thatched hut and says, "I heard the person you saved is the part-time disciple Lu Chen who helped you plant the eagle fruit tree?" Su Qingjun nods and says, "Yes." Masato Kihara looks at her with a smile that doesn't seem like a smile, and says, "In the past, I, your master, have advised you many times to draw a clear line with the people in your family, because it's beneficial to your cultivation, but you never listened. But today, for the sake of an ordinary part-time disciple, you suddenly have a falling out with the Su family. Is there any personal feelings involved?" By the end of his words, Masato Kihara's eyes have already faintly revealed a sharp light, and he just indifferently looks at Su Qingjun. But Su Qingjun seems to be unaware of anything, and she just says with a bitter smile, "Master, when I first became your disciple, I told you that I'm only interested in cultivation, and I'm too lazy to think about other things. Then why did you save him?" Su Qingjun's face darkens and says, "It's my Su family's brothers who have really gone too far. even if this person isn't Lu Chun, but just a roadside beggar who has nothing to do with me. I think I probably won't sit idly by. Masato Kihara stares at Su Qingjun for a moment, and suddenly nods and says, for you to think like this, it's somewhat beyond my expectations. But don't forget, you can save him for a while, but how can you save him for a lifetime? That Lu Chen's cultivation is low. In the future when he's cultivating on the Kunlun mountain, I'm afraid he'll most likely be attacked by the Su family both openly and covertly. Su Qingjuan's expression suddenly turns cold. But Masato Kihara doesn't seem to have the intention to let her off, and only says with a smile, when that time comes, he's just an ordinary part-time disciple, and he can't really follow you for a lifetime. He and you are people from two completely different worlds, and he has to do all kinds of dirty and tiring work, while you're destined to be a person above others from birth. When that time comes, what will he do? Su Qingjun grits her teeth, and says, I've also thought about this, he's not someone who has nothing to do with me. Masato Kihara's eyebrows twitches and says, oh then I'm curious, he's not related to you in any way, and he's just an ordinary part-time disciple. What relationship does he have with you? Su Qingjun takes a deep breath, and then says in a loud voice, Lu Chen is a disciple that I've just accepted. What? Masato Kihara is instantly stunned. Well, congratulations, master. You've now risen a generation, and become a grandmaster. Chapter 173. For a famous cultivation sect like the Kunlun party, its inheritance for thousands of years was naturally passed down through the method of passing down from master to disciple. Starting from the two founders, Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo, the torch was passed down endlessly until today. Therefore, taking in disciples was actually a very normal thing in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, most cultivators would take in disciples. It was not that there were no cultivators who did not take in disciples, but it was very rare. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. This was just like the inheritance of a family in the human world. The foundation that one had painstakingly laid down all their lives would always be hoped that someone could inherit it. The achievements one had made in the path of cultivation would always be hoped that someone could carry forward it. And at the moment of one's death, most people would always hope that there would be someone by their bedside to take care of them in old age. This was the innate nature of countless people in the vast land of the divine central continent. Whether one was a cultivator or not, or an ordinary person, it was very difficult to jump out of this concern. However, it was also because of this that taking in disciples, especially in a famous and large sect like the Kunlun party, carried another layer of caution. This was because the inheritance of one's path of cultivation was not only related to one's life, it was also related to the growth and decline of the sect's strength. If a mere odd-job disciple jumped out and announced to the world that he would take in one disciple today and another tomorrow, what was the use of teaching the old and young of the sect being trash? Of course, the Kunlun party would not allow this to happen. In fact, in order to allow most of the young disciples to better and more focused on cultivation, the unconventional rule in the Kunlun party was that other than odd-job disciples, disciples in the Qi refinement realm, and most disciples in the foundation establishment realm were not qualified to take in disciples either. Normally speaking, for the vast majority of cultivators in this world, Jindan Friar was the peak that they would never be able to reach in their entire lives. And in the past, the cultivators who were able to cultivate to Jindan realm, no matter if it was in terms of cultivation, strength, experience, or talent, they were often outstanding. Therefore, Jindan's acceptance of disciples was a boundary drawn by the Kunlun party. Of course, there were still some areas that were unclear because many cultivators were stuck at the foundation realm for their entire lives. When they grew older and reached the peak of the foundation realm, the Kunlun party would give them a way out and allow them to accept some disciples. In short, in the Kunlun party, Jindan Friar had the qualifications to accept disciples. And Su Qingjun was precisely the youngest Jindan Friar in the past few thousand years of the Kunlun party, this ancient sect. It was just that her talent was really too high and her current age was really too young. So much so that when the vast majority of people, including her master, Masato Kihara, were exclaiming in joy and admiration for her cultivation, They subconsciously forgot that Su Qingjun already had this kind of unconventional qualification to take in disciples. You accept disciples? Masato Kihara looked to be in a daze, as if he had yet to wake up from his disciples' words. Su Qingjun very calmly nodded her head and said, "Yes, master, I think I have this qualification, right?" Masato Kihara thought for a moment, and suddenly realized that his disciple was really right. This discovery made his old face turn black. He paced back and forth a few steps in front of Su Qingjun and murmured, But this is too that." He suddenly raised his head, frowned and looked at Su Qingjun said, "You yourself are only 22 years old, do you know?" Su Qingjun said, "I know." "Then why do you still accept disciples?" Su Qingjun sternly said, "Among the ancestors of our Kunlun party, which one of them has ever issued a decree saying that the 22 years old Jin Dan friar is not allowed to accept disciples?" I really don't think so." Masato Kihara touched his head in distress and said, "But there wasn't a genius like you in the past." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Master, you can't have the meaning of blaming me because of my talent." I won't." Masato Kihara hurriedly denied, but then he frowned in distress and said, "But this doesn't feel too good, Jun girl." This matter certainly seemed a bit strange. Generally speaking, most of the young people at Su Qingjun's age were still in the qi refining realm, or at most the foundation building realm. Even if there were some young geniuses like her in the whole world, they were often so young that they were completely focused on their cultivation. In their eyes, there was only the higher Yuanying realm and the legendary deity transformation realm, who would be distracted to accept disciples. Even if they wanted to accept disciples, shouldn't they wait until they were 50 or 60 years old, when most of their potential was exhausted and the upper limit of their future was already in sight? Masato Kihara naturally raised his doubts, hoping to pull this obedient female disciple of his back from the crooked path. Who knew that on this day, Su Qingjun was exceptionally stubborn. She said she wanted to accept disciples, and she would accept disciples, refusing to give in at all. Just as the two of them were arguing, and Masato Kihara was beginning to get angry from embarrassment, they heard a sudden loud noise from behind the mountain peak in the distance. Then several beams of light shot up into the sky, illuminating the heaven and earth. Not long after, they swayed and danced, turning into the image of a dragon and a tiger. They were so dazzling that people couldn't look at them directly. Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed slightly. She looked at the strange light in the sky for a moment, then said to Su Qingjun, "We'll talk about this later." Then she leaped up and flew toward the place where the strange light was shooting up into the sky. Su Qingjun was also shocked by the strange light. Although the flying goose platform was very far away, she could still feel the waves of abundant and unstoppable spiritual power of heaven and earth, like an invisible whirlpool, crazily surging toward the place where the light was rising. This was the scene that all cultivators in the world yearned for even in their dreams. Someone had broken through the great life and death juncture, breaking through the great illusion, seeing the great joy, obtaining supreme magic power, understanding the mysteries of the world, seeing through the true meaning of Taoism, ascending to the sky in one step, and becoming a superior person. It was becoming a perfected being. This day was full of ups and downs. It seemed that one thing followed another, and each one was bigger and more important than the last. It was simply too much for the eyes to take in. At first, in Kunwa City, the people of the Su family kidnapped people in the downtown area, attracting onlookers. Then the scene suddenly changed. The genius girl of the Su family, Jin Dan, came and caused a disturbance in the Su family, causing a sensation in the whole city. Then, what happened next made the things that happened in Kunwa City instantly dim. After 11 years, the light of proving true appeared on the mountain of Kunlun again. The 5,000-year-old Kunlun finally had a great perfected being in the Yuanying realm. Apart from the extremely small number of deity transformation stage perfected beings who were endowed with extraordinary talent and great luck, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were almost the pinnacle of human cultivators' achievements on the path of cultivation. When one reached the level of the Yuanying realm, one's talent was no longer completely determined by one's innate talent. Opportunities, luck, external forces, and various spiritual materials and resources were almost inexhaustible. Only then could there be hope to create an incomparably powerful perfected being of the Yuanying realm. The great life and death juncture, which made people's expressions change at the mention of its name, was like a thunderclap reverberating in the ears of the cultivation world. It was also the most famous abyss. Many geniuses failed in this place, and fell into the yellow spring when they were only one step away from the peak of their life. The significance of a perfected being of the Yuanying realm could never be overestimated. This was also the case for a famous sect like the Kunlun party. Although among the 5 great sects of Zhengxianmeng, deity transformation stage perfected beings were the face, the wind, and the strong guarantee, under normal circumstances, unless it was a matter of life and death for the sect, deity transformation stage perfected beings absolutely wouldn't make a move. Naturally, there were all kinds of connections, restraints, and restrictions. However, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were the foundation of a great sect. This couldn't be wrong. When the light of confirming reality soared into the sky, not only did the entire Kunlun mountain instantly stir, even the big and small places outside of Kunlun mountain held their breaths. The people in Kunwa city also instantly forgot about the previous liveliness. Each and every one of them gazed at the strange light in the depths of the mountain, which was connected to the sky. The head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, quickly rushed over from Tiankuan Peak. Before he arrived, there were already 7 or 8 perfected beings standing in the air, looking down at the 3 Zhongtal mountain below. Yes, the light of confirming reality was emitted from that immortal's cave. It was Exion's master Dongfang Tao. After perfected person Idle Month, other perfected beings of the Kunlun party, Yuanying perfected beings, rushed over one after another. The friendship of fellow disciples was one thing, but those who achieved the perfected being realm knew more about the hardships and dangers than ordinary people. It was indeed worthy of great joy and celebration. In addition, there was another meaning that could only be understood. The moment one became a perfected being, the light of confirming reality would soar into the sky and produce all kinds of special illusions, which could somewhat reflect the accomplishments of the perfected being's cultivation technique and the level of his cultivation. Although it couldn't be too accurate, this light of confirming reality couldn't deceive people. At the very least, it would give people an idea. Before long, in the sky outside the 3 Zhongtal mountain, many silhouettes appeared near and far. They silently and concernedly looked at the immortal's cave and the light of confirming reality. At the foot of the mountain, there were also many people rushing over one after another. Exion stood at the very front, just outside Dongfang Tao's immortal's cave. Her eyes were full of surprise and expectation. She looked at the strange scene over there without blinking. Beside her, Melaleuca japonica had a face full of emotion. Her expression was somewhat complicated as she looked at the immortal's cave. Other than them, there were also many people from the Kunlun party who were attracted over. Of course, among them, there couldn't be people with low cultivation. For example, the odd job disciples wouldn't join in the fun. Those people with innate talents didn't even have the qualifications to see the light of confirming reality. It was better for them to honestly go back to work. Somewhere in the sky above the 3 Zhongtal mountain, the head of the heavenly soldier hall, Dukanjinren, stood on the clouds with an indifferent expression. Beside him, He Yi's expression was calm, but his expression was slightly complicated as he looked at the strange light that could pierce through the sky and the earth. After a moment, Dukanjinren's voice came from the front. He said, "If you must go and ask him, be careful. Old man Dongfang's temper isn't good." "Yes, disciple understands." Chapter 174. The majestic Kunlun mountains were undulating. Even in broad daylight, there would always be shadows, and there would always be places where the sun could not shine. The martyr's grave was such a place that seemed to be forever hidden in the darkness. When the dazzling spiritual light shone upon the mountains, everyone gasped in admiration. The light came from far and near, but it did not fall on the back of the dark mountain, unable to shine into the shadows. The corpse stood silently in the dark courtyard, looking up at the light in the sky and the faintly discernible dragon and tiger phenomenon. It galloped unhindered, arrogant, and symbolized the greatest power in the world. After a long while, He turned around and walked into the darkness without a sound, like a lonely ghost left behind in the mortal world. The divine light of testimony was a rare cultivation phenomenon. Many cultivators would not be able to see it even once in their lives if it was not for a fortuitous encounter, let alone a regular person. That was why, although Lu Chen was heavily injured, Su Qingjun helped him sit up in the straw hut on Flying Goose Terrace. She leaned against the windowsill and looked out at the strange light in the sky. Su Qingjun sat by his side and supported him. For some reason, both she and Lu Chen seemed to be unperturbed despite the fact that their identities, positions, and abilities were worlds apart. When she saw the divine light of testimony in the sky, Su Qingjun could not help but feel excited. Even for a publicly acknowledged genius like her, the Yuanying realm was still a distant goal. There was still a long way to go. Not to mention the legendary Great Gate of Life and Death, where geniuses would die prematurely. No one could be certain that they could pass it. When she collected her excitement and calmed down, Su Qingjun quickly noticed that Lu Chen's expression was a little too calm as he gazed at the mystical light in the distance. For a lowly errand disciple, the wondrous scene that appeared right now was very likely a realm that he would never be able to reach in his entire life. However, even though Lu Chen looked at it very seriously, he did not seem to be excited at all. He seemed to be calmer than Su Qingjun, like an indifferent and ordinary person. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun asked Lu Chen. She was a little concerned, but also a little curious. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun pointed at the light in the sky and said, "You don't seem to be too interested in the divine light of testimony." Lu Chen was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and sighed. "Eldest miss, if you had dozens of wounds on your body like I do right now, the pain would be excruciating, and you would want to faint immediately. You wouldn't be able to lift your spirits for other things." Su Qingjun gave it some thought and agreed. She sighed softly and said, "I was careless." As she spoke, she helped Lu Chen lie down again and said in a low voice, "You should rest well." Lu Chen looked at her face and suddenly said, "What you said outside before, were you serious?" Su Qingjun said, "What?" Lu Chen said, "Of course, when you announced to your master that you wanted to accept me as a disciple." "Ah, you heard it?" Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, "Your voice was not low at that time." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "I was serious." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Can I refuse this matter?" "What?" Su Qingjun was shocked. It was clear that Lu Chen's reaction was beyond her expectations. Lu Chen didn't say anything and only calmly looked at her. After a moment, Su Qingjun frowned and asked, "Why?" Lu Chen said, "Your master was not happy." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Are you afraid of him?" Lu Chen said, "Your master is spiritual master Yuanying and I am an odd-job disciple. Do you think I should not be afraid of him?" Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she softly said, "I clearly only want to accept a disciple. Your identity is not the same." Lu Chen somewhat helplessly interrupted her words and said, "Your talent is too good. Everyone has placed too much hope on you, especially your master. So he will definitely not allow anything that could delay your cultivation to happen. Moreover, I am older than you." Su Qingjun was startled and said, "You still care about this?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "You know I am thick-skinned. Of course I don't care about this. But other people care. You are a 22-year-old young lady, and you accepted a man who is several years older than you as a disciple. Moreover, his talent is very poor. What do you want other people to think?" Su Qingjun coldly snorted, and a trace of anger flashed across her face. But she didn't say anything. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Of course, others would only think that you're possessed, or perhaps you're young and insensible, and you've been seduced and bewitched by others. Then no one will come to find trouble with you. But if you really accept me as a disciple, I am afraid that the entire Kunlun mountain will not be pleasing to the eye. When that time comes, do you think I can live long?" Su Qingjun looked deeply at Lu Chen and suddenly said, "Your current reaction is completely different from what I originally thought." Lu Chen said, "Oh, then what did you originally think?" Su Qingjun said, "I thought that if I told you about this, you would jump 3 feet high and be elated and in disbelief. Then you would cry bitterly and kneel in front of me, hugging my feet and calling me master. Lu Chen raised his hand with some difficulty and scratched his head. He smiled and said, "It seems that it should be like this." "Well, yes, I have already prepared to kick you away," Su Qingjun said calmly. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face. After a moment he gently nodded and said, "Thank you." "You are welcome." In the end, Lu Chen ultimately did not become the disciple of the Kunlun party's youngest genius, Jindan Su Qingjun. This title, which was enough to make all the younger generation disciples drool, was far away from him. However, probably in order to make up for the harm that Lu Chen suffered this time, and also to better protect him from being targeted and framed by her own family in the future, under Su Qingjun's insistence, Lu Chen still obtained the title of a nominal disciple. The title of nominal disciple was very different from the official disciple who formally entered the sect. Basically, it could be seen as a kind of exchange of favors. For example, a certain cultivator with profound cultivation accidentally owed a favor, but this favor was not enough for him to accept a disciple and teach him. Therefore, there was this kind of compromise method in title. Generally speaking, a nominal disciple could not obtain the master's Dao inheritance. It was nothing more than a topic that could be used to brag on normal days, and an excuse to pretend to be fat at one's own cost in times of crisis. Of course, with this title, others could not recklessly bully him. Otherwise, who would know if that master's mood was good or not? If he angered a great cultivator and came to find trouble, wouldn't he be in big trouble? Therefore, this method was equivalent to Su Qingjun giving Lu Chen a talisman. It was equivalent to indirectly telling the people outside that although this handyman disciple was a waste, he was now a nominal disciple of Su Qingjun. They could not casually bully him anymore, otherwise, she might be angry and not be polite. For the final result, Masato Kihara did not have any objection. He had seen a lot of nominal disciples, and they were not considered real disciples at all. As long as it did not affect Su Qingjun's cultivation and reputation, he was too lazy to care about the trivial matters of the Su family. But even so, with Su Qingjun's current reputation in Kunlun Mountain, suddenly having a nominal disciple, even if it was just a handyman disciple, was still very sensational. Logically speaking, this matter should have been a little troublesome, and people would talk about it for a while. But fortunately, during this period, the matter of Dongfang Tao becoming a spiritual master yuanying was too important. Very soon, it overwhelmed all other trivial matters, allowing Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to breathe a sigh of relief. After Dongfang Tao's divine light of verification appeared, it meant that he had truly broken through the great life and death barrier and become a spiritual master yuanying. However, he did not immediately come out of the cave residence, but continued to cultivate in seclusion for more than half a month. Most people could understand this. The yuanying realm was unusually strong, and it was equivalent to being reborn. After breaking through the great life and death barrier, it was normal for one's aura to be unstable and his foundation to be unstable, and he needed a period of time to stabilize it. And for cultivators, especially high-level cultivators, the safest place in the world was, of course, the cave residence where they cultivated in seclusion. Half a month later, Dongfang Tao successfully came out of seclusion. At that time, most of the Kunlun party's yuanying Jinren and Jindan friar were present to congratulate him. Even Lord Tianlan, who was not in Kunlun Mountain, sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Among the people present to congratulate him, of course, the leader, spiritual master idol month, was the leader. At that time, on the 30 Peak, there were as many Zenrens as there were clouds, and Jindan Jinren could be seen everywhere. It could be said to be a gathering of prosperity for a moment, and it was also a rare display of high-level cultivators for the Kunlun party. It once again revealed to the world the unfathomable strength of the majestic Kunlun. After Dongfang Tao came out of the cave, he was full of energy, and his eyes were shining. He was full of satisfaction, and he laughed 3 times towards the blue sky. Next to him, Exin had already rushed over excitedly, and hugged him with great joy. Dongfang Tao laughed loudly, and then nodded and smiled at Melaleuca japonica beside him. Then he strode towards where Spiritual Master Idol Month was. A gift of gratitude was still necessary. If there were no sex, there would not be so many spiritual materials and resources. If there were no sex, there would not be such a stable and peaceful cultivation environment. These words, everyone knew in their hearts. Dongfang Tao quickly approached, and just as he was about to greet, he was suddenly startled. He saw that among the group of Yuanying Jinren in front, Spiritual Master Idol Month was standing at the forefront, smiling and nodding at him. However, in front of everyone else, there was another person standing next to Spiritual Master Idol Month. It was a little girl who seemed to be only a little over 10 years old. Her face was calm like the snowstorm on the winter peak, cold and slightly chilly. Chapter 175. On the day that Dongfang Tao became a perfected person and walked out of his cave residence, most of the important figures in the Kunlun party were present. Although the two highest-ranking perfected cultivators in the divine transformation realm did not come in person, they sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Perfected cultivator Tianlan's message was sent by perfected Qiandang of Baichaotang. Everyone in the Kunlun party already knew that perfected Qiandang and perfected cultivator Tianlan had a close relationship, so no one was surprised. On the other hand, Hakushin Jinkuan sent a 10-year-old girl who was, of course, White Lotus. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, White Lotus stood beside perfected cultivator Idol Month, in front of all the other perfected cultivators. Of course, this was a very meaningful thing, but there was enough reason to tell others about it, because White Lotus was holding the wind speech plate in her arms at that time. Hakushin Jinkuan used this treasure as a medium, which was equivalent to directly congratulating Dongfang Tao, so the meaning was naturally different. However, from that day on, everyone in the Kunlun party finally realized that in his old age, Hakushin Jinkuan regarded this 10-year-old genius girl, who was said to be a once-in-a-thousand-years genius, as his most valued successor. And because of this, there was another person that people had not noticed before, but now privately attracted attention again. It was the other incomparably powerful perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm in the Kunlun party, who had not had a successor for many years. What on earth was that bald perfected cultivator thinking? How would I know what the damn baldy is thinking? Lu Chen raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then complained to old Ma. Anyway, what I know is that he is the most unreliable person in the world. Old Ma patted his shoulder and comforted him. You have suffered a lot this time. I understand that you are depressed. Believe me, he is not feeling good either. Lu Chen squinted at him, his face full of doubt and disbelief. What's wrong with you, Baldy? Old Ma said sternly. When he heard about this, especially when he heard that you gritted your teeth and endured it for the sake of the big picture, that you would rather be humiliated and seriously injured than do anything, he flew into a rage and angrily scolded the Su family for being bastards. He asked me to tell you that he will remember everything that happened today. Once he succeeds in the future, you don't even need to say anything. When he comes back, he will first start with the Su family. He will kill those blind trash to vent your anger. Bullsh T. Lu Chen scolded. You've been talking for a long time, but you still won't budge. What was the use of that? If you have the guts, you can ask Baldy to go to the Su family now. With his ability, destroying the Su family is as easy as crushing a bug. Why would he waste so much time talking? Old Ma suddenly looked embarrassed. He smiled bitterly and said, This, Immortal is in a different position from us. He has more fetters, so he really can't do whatever he wants. As he said this, his face became serious and he promised Lu Chen again. Anyway, don't worry. Immortal has said again and again that this matter is not over. He will remember what happened to the Su family. Sooner or later, he will make trouble for them. Lu Chen rolled his eyes, with an expression that said, I am not a fool to believe you. Old Ma also laughed and quickly changed the topic. He said with a smile, Okay, let's not talk about this. Anyway, that is what Immortal said. We will know in the future. By the way, are your injuries better? Lu Chen stretched his arm and said, I think they're almost healed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come down the mountain to drink with you. Old Ma nodded and said, Your injuries are recovering really fast. Although most of your cultivation has been crippled, at least your foundation is still there in terms of recovery. You can't even compare to a foundation-building cultivator, let alone an aura refinement disciple. Lu Chen was startled, but he soon nodded and said, I probably swindled a lot of panaceas from Su Qingjun these days. They're still somewhat useful. Old Ma looked at him enviously and said, Look at your life, it's too comfortable. Other people work themselves to death to save the beauty, but you just lie there and let the beauty save the black bear. You eat other people's food, use other people's things, and now you're even living outside other people's immortal's cave, right? He let out a long sigh and said with a bleak expression, What a pity, the world is so unfair. I, Ma Xiaoyan, have been an elegant young man for so many years, but why haven't any outstanding women taken a fancy to me? Have all the flowers been stuck in cow dung? Stuck my ass. Lu Chen scolded him without the slightest trace of politeness and said, Just lie there and let other people cut you dozens of times for me to see. Is that comfortable? Why are you pretending to be young? You're still an elegant young man. Wake up, it's been several decades, and you've never lost any weight. You've always been like a pig. If it wasn't because that damn Baldy was fatter than you, I would have thought you were the reincarnation of a pig immortal. Even if there were flowers, they definitely wouldn't be stuck in your head. Old Ma's expression turned serious. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, I heard you called True Monarch the reincarnation of a pig immortal. So what if I called him? What do you want? Lu Chen glared at him. Oh, nothing. Your voice is the loudest, you're the best. Pretend I didn't say anything, Old Ma said calmly. How's the situation on the mountain? Old Ma asked as he poured him a glass of wine. Lu Chen took the wine glass and said, It's all right. The main thing is that Dongfang Tao suddenly became a true monarch. This matter was very sensational and attracted everyone's attention. Plus, I didn't really become Su Qingjuan's disciple, so it's not too conspicuous. Old Ma snorted and said, This time it's really an undeserved disaster. I was disgusted by those 3 Su families' trash. To be honest, if you hadn't stopped me with your gaze that day, I wouldn't have been able to hold it in. Lu Chen smiled and said, It's nothing. It's not worth it to ruin our big plan for those things. Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but lowered his voice and whispered to Lu Chen, Oh right, I've always wanted to ask you. Although you endured it that day, we didn't know that those guys actually hid such disgusting torture tools and made you suffer so much. But if Su Qingjun really didn't come, would you really endure it to the end? Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Old Ma. After a moment, he slowly shook his head and said, I won't. Then you're going to fall out with them? Old Ma asked. When they made their move that day, I had already made my decision. Once their attacks reached the point where my bones and muscles were injured and my life was in danger, I couldn't care so much anymore. I couldn't really wait for death to come, so I naturally had to make a move. Well, I think so too. Old Ma nodded, but then he glanced at Lu Chen. There seemed to be a trace of lingering fear in his eyes. He said, At the beginning you suffered such a serious injury and were cut so many times by those trash. I thought you would have been unable to endure it. Lu Chen smiled as he swept his gaze across his body. Beneath his clothes, countless scars could be vaguely seen on his flesh. He was silent for a moment and then said lightly, After being burned by the black flame for 10 years, I seem to have gotten used to the pain. Old Ma didn't say anything and just nodded silently. What do you plan to do next? Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen stretched and said, What else can I do? Continue to live, and then secretly find a spy. What should be done has to be done. Oh right, help me find some information. What information? The daily routine, whereabouts and preferences of the younger generation of the Su family. The more detailed, the better. Old Ma's eyes lit up. There was a trace of excitement on his face. He whispered, What's wrong? You can't stand it anymore? Lu Chen sneered and said, I'm not a saint. Do I have to bear it silently after being dealt with like this? No, I can't stand it. Well said. Old Ma slapped his thigh. The smile on his face suddenly seemed to have a bit of fierceness. He gritted his teeth and said, Isn't it like this? In our line of work, let's compete with each other. Who's afraid of who? Speaking of this, he paused for a moment and hesitated. He said to Lu Chen, "But it has only been less than a month. If you immediately retaliate, will it attract attention and implicate you?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "I endured it that day, so I naturally won't act rashly for the sake of taking revenge. However, I can't let this matter go just like this. I have to find an opportunity to get it back, and let them taste the true pain of this world." Old Ma looked at his face and frowned. He seemed to feel a trace of coldness. But soon his face returned to normal. He said, "No problem. Anyway, I don't like these people. Don't worry about the information. I'll give it to you next time you go down the mountain. We brothers will kill them." Lu Chen hummed an acknowledgement and stood up, looking like he was about to leave. Old Ma seemed to suddenly think of something. He suddenly said to him, "By the way, if you make up your mind to do this, what about Su Qingjun?" Lu Chen paused and then said, "What's there to worry about? She won't know that I did it." Old Ma nodded and said, "Well, that's true. If we do it secretly, we won't be afraid of being known by others. But I'm just asking casually. I'm a little curious. You said that the Su family is naturally hateful. It's not a big deal if we kill them. But I heard that Su Qingjun is a good woman. She is also very good to you. For you, she not only quarreled with her family, but also flipped the table and smashed the wall. She beat her younger brother. In order to take care of you on Mount Kunlun, she gave you the title of a nominal disciple." Lu Chen raised his eyes and quietly looked at Old Ma. Old Ma's voice became softer and softer. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked, "What do you want to say?" Old Ma said, "I want to ask you, don't you care about her feelings? I was injured and suffered. I want to take revenge. Why should I care about her feelings? But between the two of you, aren't there some, at least mutual appreciation?" Lu Chen's eyes were slightly lowered, like a shadow swaying in the dark. He looked at the light in the distance with no expression. After a while he said lightly, "We are shadows. How can we be qualified to talk about love? You think too much." He turned around and walked out. At the same time his voice carried a bit of coldness. He said, "Help me find out information about those people. When I do it myself, I think you may be a little relieved and no longer have any doubts." Old Ma stood still and watched Lu Chen walk out of the door alone. After a while, a smile suddenly appeared on his face, but the smile was a bit desolate and bleak. Chapter 176. Dongfang Tao, who had achieved the great cause of Yuanying enlightened master, could now be said to be an influential figure in the Kunlun party. He was an important figure that everyone in the sect paid close attention to. After all, it had been 11 years since the last Yuanying enlightened master of the Kunlun party was born. All kinds of welcoming and sending off, as well as all kinds of red tape, re-establishing his position and authority in the sect, all matters naturally fell into place. According to the rules of the Kunlun party, as long as one cultivated to the level of Yuanying enlightened master, he would be qualified to set foot on the 4 extraordinary peaks in the sky and clouds, the core of the Kunlun party, to cultivate. At the same time, Yuanying enlightened master's immortal's cave in the mountains would also be preserved. After these matters came to an end, Dongfang Tao formally held a ceremony to let Xian enter the sect as his master. She could be regarded as the first personal disciple he had ever accepted. After the news spread, the entire Kunlun mountain was in an uproar, especially among the various aristocratic families in Kunwa City, who reacted even more strongly. Although this news was heard by well-informed people, at that time, Dongfang Tao was at most a veteran Jindan friar. Later, when he was injured and went into closed-door meditation for a long time, his reputation became even weaker and almost no one had any scruples about him. But who would have thought that this old man would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat? After going into closed-door meditation for a long time, he unexpectedly produced a Yuanying enlightened master, which really caught people unprepared. Overnight, the prices of the small family in Kunwa City skyrocketed. After all, Xian was now Dongfang Tao's only disciple. If nothing unexpected happened, she would very likely inherit Dongfang Tao's orthodoxy in the future. A powerful Yuanying enlightened master standing behind him was already enough to deter many influential families in this city. After formally becoming his disciple, Exian's status in the Kunlun party naturally rose to the sky in a single bound. Soon, she moved out of the fragrance garden and lived in the 30 peak. When Dongfang Tao went to cultivate in the clouds in the future, this mountain cave would belong to Exian. There were still a lot of things to do in the following days. There seemed to be an endless stream of people coming to congratulate him and make friends with him. From cultivation sects to influential clans in Kunwa City, from big shops to cultivation sects and forces of various sizes around the Kunlun party, all of them sent people to greet him and make friends with him. Exian has really broadened her horizons. She only feels that the cultivation world in front of her seems to have opened a wider door. However, during this time, the pair of master and disciple on the 30 feet peak welcomed a special guest. When the young man handed the visiting card to Exian and waited patiently with a smile on his face, Exian had a strange feeling in her heart. On the name card, there were 2 words, He. When Dongfang Tao received the visiting card from Exian, he was also a bit surprised. He had been out of closed-door meditation for a long time, so he naturally knew some things he should know, such as the matter that happened to Exian that caused a sensation in the cultivation sect. Dongfang Tao was naturally unhappy about the fact that his beloved disciple had almost been disgraced and almost disfigured. To be exact, he was furious and furious. However, the main culprit of this matter, He Gang, had already been dealt with and expelled from the Kunlun party. This punishment was very harsh in the cultivation world, so even Dongfang Tao couldn't say anything about it. Although He was He Gang's elder brother, he almost didn't do anything wrong in this matter. On the other hand, He's status was absolutely not something an ordinary disciple, He Gang, could compare to. He himself was a talented disciple who was highly valued by the cultivation sect. At such a young age, he had already cultivated to the peak of the foundation building realm. It was very likely that in the near future, he would become a Jindan friar. At that time, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Su Qingjun, who was currently in the limelight, and become a true genius who had the hope of peaking into the Yuanying realm, or even the deity transformation stage. Not to mention, he was not alone. Standing behind him was the powerful Yuanying spiritual master, Du Kong. The Heavenly Soldier Hall was also very powerful in the sect. If it was still the Jindan friar, the temperamental and easily angered Dongfang Tao might have gotten angry and directly chased He away. However, after cultivating to the Yuanying spiritual master, he seemed to have suddenly become a bit timid. Thus he ordered Exian to invite He in to meet him. The atmosphere when they met was a bit awkward. There was no so-called meeting to forget enmity with a smile, and there was no amiable, happy and polite scene. Dongfang Tao was indeed an old man with a strange temper. Although he suppressed his anger and didn't target He, his pair of bright eyes stared at He from head to toe. This was not a good sign. Fortunately, He didn't seem to care about this. He maintained a calm smile for a long time. Only when Dongfang Tao opened his mouth to ask questions did he answer them one by one. His attitude was always modest and courteous, neither servile nor overbearing. He even maintained an extremely elegant and courteous attitude towards Exian. It was difficult not to have a good impression of such a person. Even Exian was no exception. In the process of meeting Dongfang Tao, He said many things. Among them, there were some messages from his master, Dukanjinren. The main idea was that Dukanjinren would personally come over in a few days to bring Dongfang Tao to the strange peak between the clouds in the sky. He would also tell him about some of the special features of the mountain. This was obviously a favor, and it was a favor that was hard to refuse. With Dongfang Tao's temperament, his expression softened when he looked at He. He even praised him a few times. Before leaving, He whispered a few words to Dongfang Tao while Exian was packing up the tea set. Dongfang Tao's expression changed slightly, but he didn't reply. When he looked at He again, the expression in his eyes was different. After He left, Dongfang Tao pondered for a long time. When Exian passed by, he called out to her and said, "Exian, do you still remember the matter with He Gang?" Exian was startled for a moment. She didn't expect her master to suddenly mention this matter again. She immediately said, "That matter? I can't say I've forgotten it now. When I saw Senior Marshal Brother He just now, I actually felt strange." Dongfang Tao nodded. After a moment of silence, he said to Exian, "If they deliberately harmed you, I will naturally stand up for you. You don't need to be afraid. But since the past is in the past, you don't need to keep it in your heart. You don't need to hold a grudge against He. Yes, your disciple understands." Exian nodded in agreement. She then glanced at Dongfang Tao and said, "Master, from what you've said, could it be that you have an opinion about this Senior He? It's best if you don't provoke this person." Dongfang Tao said lightly, "You're saying that I can live here in the future?" Lu Chen's expression was a little surprised. Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, the Flying Goose Terrace is quite big. Moreover, I have always wanted to find someone to help me cultivate some precious spiritual herbs. It's a pity that I haven't been able to find someone who I can trust, who has the ability to cultivate, and who is willing to work hard. So now that I've finally caught one, I can't let you run away so easily." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and then said, "Is it really okay for me to live on the Flying Goose Terrace? Won't others gossip?" Su Qingjun said lightly, "Aren't you my disciple in name? Just think of it as me squeezing you dry and making you work for free." The situation she was talking about was not uncommon in the Kunlun sect. Some high-level cultivators would often take in nominal disciples, but they didn't pass on their skills and techniques. Instead, they would just give some spiritual materials and resources or basic techniques as a reward, and then have people specially cultivate important spiritual materials for them. Of course, Lu Chen had also heard about this. However, Su Qingjuan's words were of course a joke. He also laughed, then extended 2 fingers and said, "I can move here, but I have 2 conditions." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment. Then she looked a little annoyed and said, "Hey, do you know how many people in the entire Kunlun party have racked their brains to live here? You just have to be the most troublesome person. How dare you mention conditions to me?" "Yes, what you said is very reasonable." Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, "2 conditions, do you want to hear them?" "Humph. Speak." "First, I don't want to live in this straw hut anymore," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, and immediately became vigilant. She said, "Hey, don't push your luck. You want to live in my cave abode? That's absolutely impossible." Lu Chen laughed and said, "What a joke. Do I look like that kind of person?" "I always feel that you do." "You misunderstood." Lu Chen glared at Su Qingjun, then pointed to the forest behind him and said, "I want to live in a wooden hut. I will cut firewood and build a house myself. It will be bigger and stronger, so that it won't be so easily destroyed. Is that okay?" Su Qingjuan's cheeks were slightly red, and she softly muttered, "Narrow-minded stingy." "Huh? What did you say?" "Oh, nothing. You can build a wooden hut. Later, when I have time, I can also cut down 2 big trees for you," Su Qingjun said seriously. Lu Chen nodded and said, "Second, I want to raise a dog." "What?" Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, and almost thought that she had heard it wrong. Lu Chen turned around and whistled loudly. A moment later, a woof-woof sound could be heard. A black shadow ran out from the forest and rushed to Lu Chen's side. It was Atu, who was dilly-dallying with him in a very intimate manner. Why is there so many wounds on this dog's body?" When Su Qingjun saw the appearance of Atsu, she also gasped. Lu Chen sighed with a sorrowful expression. He said to Su Qingjun, "This is an old dog that I've raised for more than 10 years. It's been with me through life and death situations. It's covered in wounds, and it's about to reach the end of its life. I really don't want to be separated from it. Can you do me a favor?" Su Qingjun looked at Atsu with sympathy. When she was about to say yes, she suddenly felt a little strange. She frowned and said, "But I don't think this dog is old. It is quite energetic." Lu Chen said calmly, "This native dog is very young." "Really? Well, don't just look at how lively it is. Who knows, it might suddenly die in a few days." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, and quickly waved her hand. "Forget it, it is just a dog. Let it stay." You don't have to curse it like this. Lu Chen laughed and said, "Thank you very much, Atsu, thank you." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly stopped. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun turned their heads at the same time. They saw that Atsu, who was still circling around Lu Chen, suddenly sneaked to the side of the mountain wall. After sniffing for a while, it lifted its legs and peed under a rock not far from the stone door of the cave residence. Then it ran back leisurely, shaking its head and wagging its tail, looking very happy. Su Qingjuan's face darkened. She stared at Lu Chen. Lu Chen had an awkward expression on his face. He laughed dryly and said, "You see, this dog is like a human when it is old. It pees a lot. So disgusting." Well. Chapter 177. In any case, Lu Chen and the black dog were now temporarily staying at the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the days when they were working tirelessly as handyman disciples in Baichaotang, it was much more comfortable. It was comfortable to have Jean Dan Fryer looking after them. Since he no longer had to work in the herb garden of the Flowing Fragrance Garden every day, his days suddenly became leisurely. Lu Chen also had more time to do his own things. After his injuries recovered, he began to go to the dense forest behind the Flying Goose platform to cut wood, preparing to build the wooden house he mentioned before. Of course, a wooden house was more comfortable than a straw hut. Moreover, the forest covered a wide area, and there were hundreds of thousands of trees. Naturally, Su Qingjun would not be stingy with these things. Since she was young, she had never seen anyone cut wood to build a house, so during this period, she often stood at the side and watched Lu Chen work curiously. It took 4 to 5 days to build the wooden house. After it was completed, Lu Chen was in a good mood. However, Su Qingjun shook her head at the side, saying that the wood of the house was not bad, but it looked ugly. Since he had the status of a nominal disciple, and was temporarily staying on the Flying Goose Terrace, it was impossible for Lu Chen to really do nothing and idle around all day. It would be hard for him to explain himself to the outside world. Therefore, he picked up his old job and cleaned up the spiritual field on the Flying Goose platform. He also expanded the area. Then Su Qingjun got some spiritual grass and spiritual fruit seeds and planted them in the spiritual field. From then on, Lu Chen officially became Su Qingjun, the hard worker, who was specially squeezed by Jean Dan Fryer to farm. This kind of person was very common in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, even though people who did this kind of work still had the identity of a handyman disciple, there was always someone above them. It would sound very good if people said that they were no longer a handyman disciple of the Kunlun party, but that they were someone under the command of a certain Jean Dan or a certain Jinren. Wouldn't that be a lot more impressive? Moreover, in terms of profit, the returns of the odd job disciples who worked for these high-grade cultivators were much higher than before. As a result, there were many times when everyone was racking their brains for this position. The reason why so many people wanted to participate in the eagle fruit cultivation competition at the Flowing Fragrance Garden was because they hoped that one day, Su Qingjun would take a fancy to them. The best outcome was actually Lu Chen's current situation. After receiving this kind of treatment, Lu Chen was much more free than before. The spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs planted in the spiritual fields were also not as delicate as the eagle fruit tree that he could not easily leave. As for Su Qingjun, she was also quite polite to him and did not really squeeze him for labor. It should be said that his life was still relatively relaxed. Therefore, Lu Chen now actually had time to wander around the Kunlun Mountains. These days, many people in the Kunlun party saw Lu Chen walking around leisurely with the black dog, which attracted the envy of many handyman disciples. One day after that, Lu Chen brought Atsa down from the Flying Goose platform and took a casual walk. Then, they walked to the house near the Flowing Fragrance Garden where someone had once died. Back then, He Changsheng died in this house. It was daytime, and most of the people who lived nearby were the lowest-level handyman disciples. Every day, they had to go to the Flowing Fragrance Garden to work, so the surroundings were quiet, and there were not many people walking around. On the day of the murder, the Kunlun party had sent people to seal off the nearby area, but after a long time of investigation, there were no results. Until now, the disciples who were guarding outside had also been withdrawn. Except for the house that was still unoccupied. This place seemed to be no different from the surroundings. The traces of the person named He Changxing in this world were quickly and completely dissipating. The wind blew gently from the forest. Lu Chun and Atsu stood quietly in the distance and looked at the house. Neither of them spoke, like two dark shadows, silent. After a while, Lu Chun turned and walked to the side. He no longer looked at the house, but walked into the wide forest on the other side. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the forest. During the day, the forest was slightly darker than outside, but the light shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, making the forest appear brighter, and the surrounding trees could be seen clearly. Lu Chun walked in the forest with a calm expression. As he gradually went deeper into the forest, the surroundings quickly quietened down. The hustle and bustle that belonged to the Kunlun party seemed to be isolated outside the forest. In this forest, there was only silence. After walking for a while, he came to the place where he had come here to stare at late at night. That day, in a pitch-black night, this corner deep in the forest was so dark that one could not see their fingers in front of them, completely submerged in darkness. Now that it was daytime, Lu Chun could clearly see that there was actually a big tree in front of him. A big tree that looked very large and dense, older than the surrounding trees. The mottled bark was covered with moss, and a few drops of morning dew still remained on the branches and leaves. The strong roots protruded from the ground, looking like a giant claw tightly gripping the earth. Lu Chun stared at the tree for a while, then walked over. The forest was still silent. There was no wind, and there were no birds chirping. At this moment, the only sound seemed to be his footsteps, stepping on the dead leaves on the ground. The trunk of the big tree was very thick and large, requiring at least two people to wrap their arms around it. It was enough to hide the figure that was hiding. But this morning, when Lu Chun crossed the roots of the tree and walked to the back of the tree, it was empty. Atsu ran over and sniffed under the big tree for a while. It seemed that there was nothing special worth paying attention to, so it ran away to play at the side. Lu Chun looked at the big tree quietly, his eyes bright and focused. From the roots to the trunk, he looked at it bit by bit, as if he was carefully searching for something. However, nothing strange appeared on the big tree. There were no wounds, no scratches, and no hidden and twisted patterns. Everything seemed to be fruitless. Lu Chun frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he squatted down and carefully searched the roots of the tree that undulated like a horned dragon. He even used his hands to push away the dead leaves and black soil on the ground, and checked every hidden corner of the roots. However, in the end he still found nothing. That evil sex spy hiding in the darkness seemed to have unusual patience and vigilance, and was not tempted this time. Lu Chun stood up, his face solemn. After a moment of contemplation, he called Atsu, turned and walked back the way he came, prepared to leave this place. A beam of sunlight shone down from the branches and leaves above his head, shone on his body, and also on the silent big tree beside him. The mottled traces seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of countless years. Lu Chun continued to walk forward, but at the fifth step, he suddenly stopped. He frowned, seemed to have thought of something. The next moment, his eyes suddenly brightened, suddenly turned around, but stared intently at the front of the big tree, at the ancient and mottled traces on the tree trunk. The sunlight shone down, perhaps because it had experienced too much time. The bark on the tree trunk showed signs of cracking. Even in the daytime, the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain was still shrouded in darkness. The sinister cold air seemed to not recede all year round, emitting a rare energy in this famous mountain. Usually, not many people came here. Most of the people, including the cultivators, preferred to live in the light, even if it was the stone walls and caves that were required for cultivation. In fact, most of them were located in the sunny places. But this day, a tall figure walked in from outside the martyr's grave, and knocked on that black door. Dongfeng Tao, who had just achieved Yuanying Jinren, came to the martyr's grave, this gloomy place. There was no one around him, indicating that he had come alone. When the chilly wind blew past from an unknown corner, his expression was equally indifferent. Only a trace of deeply hidden disgust could be seen in the depths of his eyes. With a creak, the black door opened. In the gloomy courtyard, those dark rooms stood silently in the surroundings. Some were completely dark, Some flickered with dim candlelight, as if guiding the direction of the dead on the dark path. Occasionally, when the wind blew, those little candlelight would actually instantly turn green, like the burning flames in the eyes of an evil spirit. After a moment, it slowly returned to its original appearance. A thin, shriveled figure, whose entire body seemed to be shrouded in darkness, stood alone in the middle of this courtyard. His cold eyes shot out an icy light, coldly looking at Dongfang Tao, who was walking in. Dongfang Tao first looked around, his gaze paused on those dark rooms, and those candlelight for a moment, finally landing on the corpse who was standing there, nodded and said, "Long time no see." The corpse faintly laughed and said, "Yes, you are always unwilling to come here to see me, of course. We have not seen each other for a long time." Dongfang Tao's expression did not change, and he calmly said, "This damned place is eerie, no one would like to come here." The corpse's gaze turned cold, and his voice seemed to raise a few octaves as he said, "But thanks to you, I have already stayed here for 34 years. Dongfang Tao frowned and said, "Don't talk nonsense, you have sent someone to pass a message to me this time. What is the urgent matter?" After a pause, he suddenly snorted and said, "Also in the future, if you want to find someone to pass a message to, don't look for he. I don't like that person." Seeing that the corpse did not immediately answer him, and instead looked Dongfang Tao up and down, he then laughed coldly and said, "You have become Yuanying Jinren, so you immediately put on airs, huh? Is it that even if I want to find you in the future, I may not be able to summon you?" A trace of impatience flashed across Dongfang Tao's face, and he said, "If you have something to say, then say it, don't bring up old scores, and I will say it again." He stared at the corpse, and his voice also seemed to become a few degrees colder, and said, "Don't talk to me like it's all thanks to me. You have only yourself to blame for this ending of yours, junior brother." Chapter 178. Lu Chen walked in front of the tree and carefully looked at it for a while. Then he suddenly stretched out his hand and gently stroked the tree trunk. The rough tree bark felt as rough as a rock as it brushed past his palm. The surroundings were still silent, but Lu Chen's eyes became brighter and brighter. His fingers moved slower and slower. After a while, when his fingers drew across a mottled crack, he suddenly stopped. The dry and cracked bark appeared dark brown at his fingertips. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and gently pressed down on it again. Gradually, a fine crack appeared in the dark bark. With the movement of his fingers, the crack continued to expand until it became a piece of bark the size of a palm. It suddenly shook and then fell from the tree trunk. With a clatter, the piece of bark gently fell to the ground. Lu Chen didn't take a closer look. He just stared at the exposed trunk behind the piece of bark. On the smooth wood, someone had used a sharp blade to carve out a simple but twisted pattern. There was a thick line and several thin lines of different lengths and thicknesses. At first glance, it looked like random graffiti. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that when these twisted lines were put together, they looked like a tree. A big tree. The corners of Lu Chen's mouth slowly curled into a smile. He stared closely at the incomparably secretive pattern, as if he wanted to commit it to memory. After a while, he flipped his right hand, and a black dagger appeared in his hand. Then a black light flashed, and with a slash, he directly chopped off the piece of wood with the pattern carved on it. Then he turned around and called out to Atsu. He quickly walked out of the forest without looking back. When Lu Chen returned to the Fian platform, he saw a pretty figure standing in front of him. At first, Lu Chen thought it was Su Qingjun, but he soon realized that something was wrong. When he took a few steps forward, he found that it was Exin. The black dog let out a happy bark and ran forward. Exin smiled and squatted down, hugged Atsu, and patted it vigorously. Atsu also happily jumped around her. After a while, Lu Chen came up and said with a smile, "Why did you come today?" Exin touched Atsu's head, then stood up and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "It's rare that I have time. I haven't seen you and Atsu for a long time, so I came to see you." Lu Chen said, "It sounds like you've been very busy recently." Exin said, "Isn't it so? Since my master came out of seclusion, people have been coming here one after another. As his only disciple, I'm very tired from receiving guests all day long. But those who are related to my master are all people of status, so I can't take it lightly. It's tiring. Lu Chen laughed and said, "Don't complain. It's better than having no one to take care of you before." Xian giggled. Lu Chen looked around and saw that the Fian platform was empty. The cave in the distance was not open, and the stone door was closed. He asked Xian, "Did you not see your sister Su when you came here?" Xian said, "No, I just came here not long ago. Sister Su hasn't come out yet, so I didn't dare to disturb her." Lu Chen nodded and said, "It's fine. Come sit with me." With that, he led Xian to the wooden house that he had built not long ago. After entering the wooden house, Xian looked around curiously. She saw that most of the house was made of wood, including the walls, tables, chairs, and beds. It was just that it had not been painted, so the whole house looked very rough, but at the same time, it exuded a natural fragrance of trees. Looking at Xian's expression, Lu Chen said with a smile, "What's wrong? You've never seen a house like this before, right?" Xian nodded and said, "Yes, it's really the first time I've seen it. Did you build this all by yourself, Brother Lu?" "Yes. That's amazing," Xian praised from the bottom of her heart. Lu Chen burst into laughter and pulled over a wooden chair for Xian to sit on. He said casually, "I just chopped some wood and tied it together. It's nothing to be surprised about." Xian laughed, and then suddenly seemed to think of something. Her face turned serious, and a sly look flashed in her eyes. She said to Lu Chen seriously, "Well, I came here today because I have another thing to inform you." "Huh? So formal. Is it something important?" Lu Chen asked curiously. Xian coughed and said, "I can't call you Brother Lu anymore." Why?" Lu Chen asked. "You see," Xian said seriously, "Sister Su and I have always been on the same level. But now that you have become Sister Su's nominal disciple, you have to call her master, right? Then when you see me, do you have to call me martial uncle?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed and scolded. "Well, now you actually know how to take advantage of me." Xian snorted and said, "What advantage? If you dare not call Sister Su master, then I won't let you call me martial uncle." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "What are you talking about? Su Qingjun is younger than me by a few years. How can I call her master? No way, no way." Xian laughed and said, "You can say that behind my back. When Sister Su really comes, let's see if you dare to admit it." Lu Chen said righteously, "A man won't call her master if I say I won't. Your threats are useless." Xian covered her mouth and giggled. She looked very happy. Looking at her appearance, Lu Chen also felt that his mood seemed to be a lot better. He smiled and said to her, "Didn't you say you were very busy? Why are you free today?" "Oh, my master went out to meet an old friend today, so I am free." Xian stretched, and then leaned on the rough bed without any taboo. With a satisfied smile she said, "It's still more comfortable here, Brother Lu." I saw the two of them say a few more words, but I didn't hear the rest. Lu Chen frowned and didn't say anything for a moment. Xian looked a little worried. She was full of thoughts and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, what do you think they talked about? My master, he couldn't have been moved by Xixiang Hii, right?" Lu Chen looked at the young girl and sighed in his heart. Xian's good days today could be said to be almost entirely due to her receiving Dongfang Tao's appreciation. Dongfang Tao also unexpectedly broke through the great life and death juncture and became enlightened Yuanying. If Dongfang Tao was bewitched by Hii and had some opinions about Xian, then it could be said to be a disaster for her. No wonder she was not calm at all. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said to Xian, "Xian, don't be anxious. In my opinion, this matter shouldn't be as bad as you think." He paused for a moment and said, "If you are still worried, I will think of a way to help you find out about Hiyi's recent movements." "Yes." Xian nodded heavily, a trace of a smile on her face. Although she knew that Hiyi Xixiang and Lu Chen's cultivation and strength were worlds apart, but for some reason, when Lu Chen said he would help her, Xian almost unconsciously believed him. What he said he would definitely be able to do. Exian thought like this and her mood immediately improved. Chapter 179. I'll go down the mountain tomorrow. Luchan said to Su Qingjun, who was standing not far away, as he sat on the ridge of the field with his back against a big tree. It was already dusk. Su Qingjun had stayed in the cave for a day, and would come out to walk around at this time. It was a relatively fixed habit for her these days. Luchan didn't know if she had this habit when she lived alone on the Fian Terrace, but under normal circumstances, dusk was a fixed time for him to chat with this woman. Most of the time, it was relatively relaxing. Speaking of which, perhaps it was because she had made a big fuss when she returned to the Su family a while ago, which frightened the family. So these days, the Fian Terrace was unusually quiet. Often, no one came up for a few days. Occasionally, some people came over, but they were some friends of Su Qingjun from the Kunlun party. No one from the Su family came. Su Qingjun didn't have much of a reaction to this, at least in front of Luchan. These days she looked very calm, but no one knew what this woman was thinking in the depths of her heart. Luchan wouldn't ask anything. After Su Qingjun made a big fuss in the Su family and returned to the mountain, the two of them quickly stopped talking about this matter. But compared to before, their relationship was undoubtedly much closer. Even Su Qingjun could joke with Luchan more casually in private. At this moment, Su Qingjun smiled and asked Luchan, "What are you going to do? I see that you're very free recently. How about growing more spiritual herbs in the spiritual field?" Luchan laughed and said, "I'm going to go down the mountain for a walk. In addition, I know some small things that you definitely haven't seen before. I'll bring some back for you to broaden your horizons." Su Qingjun was only joking at first, but her curiosity was piqued after hearing Luchan's explanation. She asked, "What is it? It sounds very interesting." Luchan smiled and said, "You'll know when I bring it back. I'll come to see you tomorrow night." Okay. The next morning, Luchan got up and went down the mountain with the black dog. Now that he was a nominal disciple of Jin Dan Friar, his identity was different. He was no longer as embarrassed as before. Dogs were valued by their owners. Recently, Atsu could also follow Luchan to wander around openly, ignoring the original rule of the Kunlun party that no one could keep a dog casually. The dog raised by the disciple of the genius Jin Dan, how could it be an ordinary dog? On the way down the mountain and into Kunwu City, Luchan didn't rush to find Old Ma in the secluded alley. Instead, he took Atsu to wander around the street. Along the way, he bought a lot of meat and bones for Atsu. He put them in a bag and carried them all the way to Black Hill Pavilion to feed Atsu. This made Atsu greedy. Along the way, it drooled and stared at the bag in Luchan's hand. It couldn't see anything else. Then Luchan wandered around the street for a while, and bought a few things before he took Atsu back to Black Hill Pavilion. After entering the house and going to the small courtyard in the back, Luchan scattered the meat and bones on the ground in a corner. Atsu immediately roared and rushed over to pounce on the food like a fierce dog, chewing loudly. At the side, Old Ma was amused and said with a smile, "This guy must have been starving on the mountain. Why is he eating like this? It's like he hasn't eaten anything in 8 lifetimes." Luchan chuckled and said, "It's living a very comfortable life, so you don't need to worry about it. How about I leave it with you and you take care of it?" Old Ma immediately waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. I can't afford to take care of this dog." The two of them sat facing each other. Old Ma looked at him and said, "It hasn't been long since you went down the mountain. Why did you come back? Besides, there are many people from the Su family in this city. Aren't you afraid of another accident?" Luchan smiled and said, "The Su family won't dare to court disaster again. It's fine." Old Ma said with a smile, "You sound so sure. It seems you have a card up your sleeve." Luchan snorted and said, "In any case, the Su family is an old aristocratic family that has been entrenched in Kunwu City for many years. There must be a few people in the family who understand the situation. With the current situation, anyone with the slightest bit of knowledge knows that the Su family will rely on Su Qingjun the most in the future. Not everyone is as stupid as those wastes and that Madame Bai." Old Ma nodded and said, "You're right. If I were a member of the Sue family, the most important thing right now would be to ease the relationship with eldest Miss Sue as soon as possible, and use their blood relationship to move her. The more we do, the more mistakes we'll make. It'd be best if we didn't do anything. There was some regret on Lu Chen's face. He said, "That's right. I originally thought I'd draw out a few more wastes today, and see if I could use this opportunity to stir up trouble and sow discord between Su Qingjun and that family. Unfortunately, there really are people with discerning eyes. I wasted my time walking around the streets." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're too evil. You want to destroy the Su family from the root." Lu Chen sneered but didn't say anything. "Right, there's one more thing. If you have time, can you help me pay attention to He Yi's recent movements and see if there's anything strange?" Lu Chen said to Old Ma. He? Old Ma frowned and his eyes seemed to suddenly look a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why are you suddenly concerned about this person?" Lu Chen didn't hide it, and casually repeated what Xian had said to him. In the end he said, "I've always felt that this He Yi is a little strange." Last time he was clearly forced into seclusion, but after a period of time, he was suddenly released for no reason. It seems that he's been wandering around the Kunlun party recently, and seems to be meeting people everywhere. Old Ma's eyes flashed and he didn't say anything. Lu Chen noticed his expression and said, "What's wrong?" Old Ma looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're right. He is indeed strange." Do you remember I told you last time that someone was investigating the matter of the cinnabar?" "I remember. What did you find?" Lu Chen asked. Old Ma laughed coldly and said, "The person who was investigating was He Gang." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, and he sat up a little straighter. After thinking for a moment he suddenly said, "But you said before that the person who investigated this matter showed a token of the Kunlun party to some big shops?" "That's right." Lu Chen's eyes slowly lit up and he said, "But He Gang has clearly been chased out of the sect by the Kunlun party." "That's right." Old Ma had a faint smile on his face and said, "In other words, he shouldn't have this kind of thing." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said slowly, "But he has it and showed it to others. The person who could give him this kind of token. It can only be He Yi." Lu Chen fell silent, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face, as if he had thought of more things. After a moment he said in a low voice, "In other words, the person who wanted to investigate the cinnabar matter was He Yi himself. It was just that he couldn't do it himself, so he sent He Gang to do it." Old Ma nodded and said, "That's right. He Gang did this secretly. It took me a lot of effort to confirm that it was him." Lu Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he said in a low voice, "The cinnabar is usually not important, but recently it is related to a murder case of the Devil sect on the Kunlun mountain. He suddenly came out of seclusion and intervened in this matter. So the reason why he was suddenly released." The corner of his mouth slowly showed a hint of a smile, but it was not gentle and carried a hint of coldness. After looking at Old Ma pointed a finger at him with an indifferent expression. "He's coming for you. I didn't expect that there would be someone secretly pursuing me on the Kunlun mountain. This feeling." Lu Chen clicked his tongue. Old Ma squinted at him and said, "What's so strange about it? Haven't you been like this for so many years? You should be used to it, right?" "Well, you're right." Lu Chen nodded and said, "But since we know this person's purpose, it's all the more important that we investigate him." He looked at Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and said, "Don't worry, leave it to me." "Good." After saying these words, both of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. At the same time, there was a faint hint of excitement on their faces. For the shadow hiding in the dark, discovering such a secret might have a different feeling. "Hey, I see that you're in good spirits recently," Old Ma said to Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen said, "Yes, I'm busy with revenge. There are so many debts to collect. If I don't be in good spirits, how can I finish it?" Old Ma glanced at him and said, "No, I feel that you're not the same as before. When you were a shadow, you always looked bitter and hateful all day, as if you would turn hostile and kill people at the slightest disagreement. But it's different now." Lu Chen was startled and said, "What do you mean by that?" Old Ma stared at him and said, These days, I always feel that you seem to be more cheerful than before. Has your temperament changed? Or is there someone on the Kunlun mountain that made your mood better? Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he suddenly laughed and scolded old Ma with a smile. Bullsh *T. I'm a shadow, and there are thousands of incarnations. How can you see through me? How do you know that what I showed you before wasn't fake, and that what you see now is real? Old Ma nodded and said, well, what you said makes sense. Sometimes I really can't see through you. But look at yourself. Aren't you tired of living like this? He smiled and said to Lu Chen, there's only the two of us here. Just relax. Otherwise, if you keep pretending, I'm afraid that you'll go crazy in the future. Go to hell. I won't go crazy even if you go crazy. Lu Chen scolded. Old Ma laughed and walked to the side to tease Atsu, who was still eating. Lu Chen looked at his back, and the smile on his face gradually faded. Chapter 180. On the way back to the mountain, he brought Atsu, whose belly seemed to have grown bigger, and had almost swallowed all the meat and bones, back to the mountain. Along the way, he could only hear the dog's burps. The weather was clear in the afternoon. The scenery in Kunlun Mountain was quiet and beautiful. The forest was green and the trees were undulating. Occasionally, one or two waterfalls could be seen, making people walking on the mountain road feel like they were in a fairyland. In the blessed land of Spirited Mountain, spirit chi seemed to be everywhere. There were not many people on the mountain road. Because this place was within the mountain gate of Kunlun Mountain, all one could see were Kunlun disciples. There were all kinds of people, but almost all of them were chi refining and foundation establishment disciples. After all, most of the odd job disciples had a lot of things to do, so it was impossible for them to be so leisurely. Therefore, in comparison, Lu Chen was a bit conspicuous. Fortunately, there were not many people. Secondly, most of the cultivators were too lazy to meddle in other people's business, so no one paid attention to him. After walking like this for a while, Lu Chen suddenly saw a person walking on the opposite mountain road in front of him. Several people in the same direction in front of Lu Chen, whether they were foundation establishment disciples or chi refining disciples, after seeing that person, almost all of them immediately nodded and smiled to greet him. In the voice that floated with the wind, he could also clearly hear the words senior brother he and so on. Lu Chen's footsteps stopped. He looked ahead and watched the person get closer. Gradually, he could see that handsome and determined face clearly. After a moment, he stood on the side of the road with his head slightly bowed. When that person passed by him, he calmly called out like the others, senior brother he. When passing by Lu Chen, He's footsteps slightly slowed down. He turned his head to look at the inconspicuous odd job disciple standing on the side of the road. He nodded to him, and then continued to walk forward. A wind blew from the forest and made a small whirl between the two of them. It blew up a fallen leaf, floated up and fell down, rolling and floating into the distance. Peace returned to the mountain path. Lu Chen stood where he was for a while. When the other Kunlun disciples had gone far away, only the black dog was still squatting beside him. Lu Chen glanced at Atsu and suddenly said, since we've met, and we have nothing to do anyway, why don't we go and take a look? Atsu tilted his head, looking a little confused. Lu Chen turned around and walked in another direction. He had walked this path before, but now he was far away. However, Lu Chen was not in a hurry to catch up. Instead, he walked slowly. By his side, Atsu was running a few steps in front of him. He sniffed the ground lightly and then jogged forward. Just like that, Lu Chen followed Atsu, walking and walking. After walking for a long time, looking at the surrounding mountain terrain, Lu Chen suddenly frowned. This was because the mountain path in this direction was getting more and more desolate, and there were no signs of accommodation. As they went deeper, even human footprints became rare. Weeds began to appear on the road, exuding a desolate aura. After walking for a while, with Atsu's unusually sensitive nose leading the way, Lu Chen had walked a long distance on this secluded mountain path. Then he suddenly saw the nameless mountain in front of him, hidden under the tall mountain range, mostly shrouded in shadows. Although it was very far away, a very strong gloomy aura still came over. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, then he looked forward. In the distance, he could only vaguely see a blurry back of He, who seemed to be walking alone into the dark side of the nameless mountain. There was a condensed darkness there, as if it had swallowed He's figure in an instant, and nothing else could be seen. Lu Chen glanced at the mountain terrain on his left and right, and finally, his eyes fell on the nameless mountain. After a while he muttered to himself, "I didn't expect there to be such a dark place in the mountains of Kunlun. It shouldn't be." He looked a little surprised and a little confused, but he quickly calmed down again, ready to take a step forward. But before he took a step forward, he suddenly thought of something and looked back at Atsu. The black dog was sitting quietly on the ground behind him, and when Lu Chen looked over, it even wagged its tail gently. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, walked over, squatted down, and patted Atsu's head, saying, "There should be some bad things in the field in front, don't go there." It was not clear if Atsu understood him, but it just looked up at Lu Chen, barked twice, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Lu Chen's palm. Lu Chen smiled, and his smile seemed to be the most gentle of the day. He reached out and hugged Atsu's head, then patted its head and said in a low voice, "Go and play by yourself. Wait for me here, or when it gets dark, go to the Flying Goose Terrace to sleep. Do you understand?" Atsu barked, then got up and walked to the side of the mountain path, looking back at Lu Chen from time to time. Lu Chen smiled at it, and waited until Atsu ran into the forest next to the mountain, and disappeared before he slowly turned around and looked at the darkness behind the mountain again. A silent look on his face again. After a moment, he walked forward quietly until he reached the edge of the darkness. And then, like a drop of water falling into the sea, his figure disappeared into the depths of the darkness without any movement. Atsu ran and played in the forest, breathing the fresh air, jumping up and down, sometimes beating the birds, sometimes digging holes in the ground, playing very freely, and seemed to have forgotten its owner. Unknowingly, it had walked a long way in the forest, and came to a small valley in the forest that was sunken and covered with white granite. Atsu was a dog, and for a long time, it was only interested in food, and didn't care much about other things like stones and trees. It had the same reaction to this white stone valley, and slowly walked past the side of the valley, looking like it was going to continue running forward. But at this moment, a beautiful little girl's face suddenly appeared on the largest white rock in the valley. She looked at Atsu and suddenly smiled, then lay on the largest rock, waved at Atsu and shouted, "Come here." When Atsu turned his head to look, he saw a little girl of about 10 years of age. Although she was young, her temperament was different from others. Now there was a faint aura of superiority about her. This beautiful girl was, of course, White Lotus. Atsu stood where he was, looking a little surprised, but also a little wary. It seemed surprised to see White Lotus in this remote corner, but it didn't seem to lower its guard. However, White Lotus didn't seem to hate this black dog. Instead, she waved at Atsu and said with a smile, "Stupid dog, why don't you come over?" Atsu hesitated for a moment, but still slowly walked over. As Atsu approached, the smile on White Lotus's face was first shocked, then slowly disappeared, and her face became a little gloomy. She saw the wounds on Atsu's body, as well as the missing eye and half of its tail. Everything seemed to tell her that something terrible had happened to this dog. Atsu slowly walked to the bottom of the huge rock, then raised his head to look at White Lotus. In a flash, White Lotus slowly fell from the top of the rock, landing not far from Atsu. What happened? White Lotus looked at Atsu's appearance, frowned, and asked Atsu. Atsu responded with a bark, but it seemed that no one could understand it. This made Atsu look a little depressed and disappointed. However, White Lotus's eyes fell on the terrible wounds on Atsu's body again, and murmured, "It seems that the blood of the Sirius in your body is very good. You can still survive after being tortured like this." She slowly squatted in front of Atsu, and Atsu instinctively took a step back. From the beginning to the end, Atsu looked at White Lotus with a trace of fear and wariness. Something's not right. Suddenly, White Lotus opened her mouth. She stared at Atsu as if she had found something strange. After pondering for a while, she suddenly said in a low voice, "How is it possible? It seems there is the smell of blood food." She reached out a hand and slowly placed it on Atsu's head. Atsu's body was a little tense, but it still obediently lay on the ground, showing a submissive posture. White Lotus seemed to be very satisfied with this, and she had no intention of making things difficult for Atsu. Her expression was focused on thinking, and after a while, she said to herself, "On this mountain of Kunlun, there is actually a second person who knows the secret method of blood food? Who is that person?" She lowered her head, stared at Atsu's eyes and suddenly asked. Her voice sounded a little cold, but Atsu suddenly stood up from the ground after a moment of silence. It looked at White Lotus and suddenly let out a low growl from its throat. It was like a ferocious beast that had been provoked and angered, and it slowly bared its snow-white fangs at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at Atsu's actions and suddenly smiled. Beasts will be beasts. No matter how talented they are, aren't they still stupid? I know this person. She reached out her hand and patted Atsu's head. Atsu turned its head to the side, wanting to dodge, but it only felt its vision blur. White Lotus's palm still touched its head, and it happened to press down on its head. White Lotus's brows relaxed, and she gently flicked her fingers. Gradually, white smoke floated out from between her fingers. It carried a strong chill, and it evaporated in the air like the coldest ice cube. Snow Wind Sutra. This was the unique secret method of the Kunlun party's Dongfeng, the soul formation perfected Lord by Chen. Atsu seemed to have sensed something, and it immediately lay down, not daring to move recklessly. White Lotus smiled, nodded, and said, "It seems that you are still smart. Is this also the serious bloodline? But I'm a little curious. Why didn't the secret method of blood food make you, a beast, go crazy? This doesn't seem reasonable. Let me take a closer look." Chapter 181. The back of the nameless mountain had always been dark, even during the day. After Lu Chen walked into the darkness, he felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to have suddenly dropped a lot. At the same time, a gust of cold wind blew continuously from the front, as if the terrible palm of a Yin spirit was caressing his flesh and skin. Lu Chen was not too surprised by this. This was just one of the common scenes in the shadowy land. For ordinary people, it was terrifying. For ordinary cultivators, perhaps it was a little troublesome because it was rare, but for him, it was already a common sight. He seemed to have a natural ability to blend into the darkness. In this shadow, he was like a fish in the water, silently moving forward, not revealing any traces. Not long after, Lu Chen saw the black house. The black door was open at the moment, and Heyi's figure could be vaguely seen standing in the courtyard. Lu Chen hid in a dark corner, looking over there for a while, and then his eyes fell on the plaque above the black door with the words, "Righteous Grave." He frowned slightly. He could roughly guess what these two words meant, but he really did not think that there would be such a thing in the Kunlun party that seemed to only exist in the mortal world. And looking at the surroundings again, the Yin Qi was dense, and the darkness was surging. Lu Chen quickly judged that the core of this Yin land should be in that courtyard. Righteous Grave, as the name suggested, should be a place where the dead would come. Ordinary people would not come here at all. Even for a shadow like Lu Chen who used to walk in the dark, he would not easily set foot in this kind of place. No one liked this place, or rather, as long as it was a living creature, it would not like this kind of dense Yin Qi place. Therefore, since ancient times, the Yin land was one of the dangerous places. Then there was only one question left: what was he doing here? If there were no other accidents, Lu Chen would probably have thought of an answer in his heart. He stood in a dark corner, and quietly looked at the black courtyard. He thought to himself, so He Changxing's body was placed here after he died? Just as he was deep in thought, a cold aura suddenly floated out from the courtyard. Like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness suddenly spitting out its tongue. Like a sleeping evil spirit suddenly opening its eyes. A skinny figure walked out from the darkness, silently appearing behind Heyi, standing in front of the black door. A bone-chilling wind suddenly blew. His cold gaze swept through the darkness. He looked at the shadowy corner. The cold wind swept over, blowing up a few withered leaves. In the darkness, there seemed to be a storm and undercurrent surging. However, after a while only a few withered leaves fluttered in the sky and then slowly floated down. There was nothing in that dark corner. Other than darkness, it was as if nothing had ever existed. The zombie's cold gaze swept over the place. When he saw the empty and lonely darkness, a trace of extreme astonishment seemed to flash across the depth of his eyes. At this moment, a figure walked over and stood not far behind him. It was he. He too glanced outside but did not see anything. Hence he frowned and asked the zombie, "Senior, what's wrong?" The zombie did not answer him. After a moment of silence he suddenly asked, "Did you come to see me alone?" He nodded and said, "Yes." The zombie grunted and didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked back into the dark courtyard. The black gate behind him moved on its own without any wind and slowly closed up, hiding all the darkness and secrets behind it once again. The darkness outside the courtyard was as quiet as the deep sea. After an unknown period of time, in another dark corner not far from the corner, a slight tremor suddenly came from the ground. Then, as if the darkness was disintegrating, a figure slowly emerged from the darkness. It was Lu Chen. At the moment, his face looked a little cold. When he looked at the courtyard again, his gaze was completely different from before. Atsu was lying on the ground, looking at White Lotus beside him with a vigilant gaze. The little girl, who had an otherworldly beauty, was showing a faint smile at the moment. Her fair, jade-like fingers were softly brushing over the black fur on Atsu's back. Specks of tiny, translucent, crystal-like white shards floated up and dispersed on her fingertips, forming a sharp contrast with Atsu's shiny black fur. Under the white and cold radiance, faint wisps of aura lightly touched Atsu's skin. Some bounced back and some seeped in. Gradually, the smile on White Lotus's face vanished. In its place was a doubtful expression, as if she had discovered something extremely strange that she did not expect. After a while, she stopped brushing her fingers, and the snow-like powder also disappeared. Atsu raised its head and glanced at her. Seeing that White Lotus did not seem to have any other strange expression, it inched forward a little and then crept up quietly. White Lotus saw all of Atsu's movements, but for some reason, she did not stop it. In her bright and clear eyes, the figure of the black dog was reflected, but her gaze seemed to be looking further away. No, this is not the blood-feeding secret technique. Blood-feeding secret technique is so overbearing. Once the technique is cast, even if the body doesn't explode and die, it will at least end up in a frenzy. How could it still be like you? White Lotus stared at Atsu, as if she had seen something unbelievable. She murmured, "But in this dog's body, there are clearly traces of blood feeding. What is going on? Could it be that in this world, there is another kind of technique that has the same origin as blood feeding, but is stronger than the blood feeding secret technique? If this is the case, then the hundreds of thousands of lives that the southern barbarians have lost for thousands of years are just a big joke." White Lotus suddenly stood up. For some reason, her beautiful face was flushed with excitement as she stared at Atsu. Atsu was inexplicably afraid and took a step back. "Lu Chen." White Lotus chuckled softly. Her voice sounded a little erratic. She said, "Interesting, interesting. Lu Chen, who are you?" Lu Chen rushed back to Flying Goose Terrace before dusk. Atsu was delayed for a while. After he came out of the dark grave, he whistled for a while, and Atsu ran back from the forest. On the way back, Atsu didn't seem to be in a very good mood, but other than that, there seemed to be nothing unusual. There was no pain or injury. Lu Chen was also thinking about the strange figure in the dark grave, so he didn't pay too much attention to Atsu. However, when walking on the mountain road of Flying Goose Terrace, both Lu Chen and Atsu seemed to have adjusted their emotions after walking for a while. Atsu began to run back and forth happily. Lu Chen also saw from afar a figure leisurely walking on Flying Goose Terrace in the light of the approaching dusk. For some reason, when he saw the quiet figure of the woman, Lu Chen felt a lot better. He smiled and waved at Su Qingjun from afar, calling out to her. When Su Qingjun heard his voice, she looked back and smiled. When dusk arrived, the golden sunlight spread over the vast sea of white clouds, dyeing the clouds as far as the eye could see a beautiful golden color. The black dog ran happily on the Flying Goose platform. The two of them stood on the flat ground by the cliff, their shadows forming a long shadow. "You're back," Su Qingjun said to Lu Chen. "You really went for a whole day." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Yes. The journey back and forth wasn't short. Plus, I went to many places in the city to buy a lot of things, so it was a little delayed. But at least I made it back in time. Su Qingjun glanced at the bag in his hand, and her eyes showed some curiosity. She said, "What is it? Why are you being so secretive?" Lu Chen chuckled and beckoned Su Qingjun to sit down beside a few rocks. He then took out something wrapped in paper from the bag he carried with him and handed it to her. Su Qingjun took it and felt a slight warmth in her palm. She glanced at Lu Chen, but Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything. He only gestured for her to open the paper and take a look. Su Qingjun stretched out her fingers and gently opened the paper. After lifting the 2 layers of thin paper, she saw what was inside. It was a small black ball, and at the same time, it gave off a strange smell of meat. A hint of surprise appeared on her face. She looked at Lu Chen and asked, "What is this?" "Roasted loach," Lu Chen said with a smile. "Try it, it's delicious." Su Qingjun was stunned and said, "This thing can be eaten?" "Yes." Lu Chen said, "Don't be fooled by its black color. In fact, it's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and the meat inside is very delicious. I've been craving this thing since I was a child. Unfortunately, I didn't have the money to buy it at that time, so I drooled when I saw it." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, and then frowned slightly. She said, "Loach is such a vulgar thing. It lives in dirty streams, and it has no spiritual power. Eating it has no benefit for cultivation. Why should we eat it?" "There's no reason." Lu Chen shrugged and looked at Su Qingjun with a gentle and smiling expression. He said, "It's just for the sake of delicious food. I think you don't have to do everything for the sake of cultivation, right?" "Is that so?" Su Qingjun seemed to be a little confused but also somewhat moved. "Try it. It's a delicacy that only mortals and poor people can eat." Lu Chen looked at her, and for some reason, a strange emotion flashed in his eyes. He then smiled and said, "Eating whatever you want, living whatever life you want, isn't that the best?" Su Qingjun smiled, looked at him, and suddenly asked, "Then in your heart, do you want to live that kind of life?" "Of course, I really want to live a free life without being manipulated by others. I really want that." Lu Chen laughed. Chapter 182. That day, Su Qingjun tried the roasted loach out of curiosity. Unfortunately, she didn't get to taste the mouth-watering, lingering delicacy that Lu Chen mentioned. After frowning a few times, Su Qingjun put down these ugly and seemingly ordinary things. "It doesn't seem to be to my liking. I don't think it's that delicious," Su Qingjun said to Lu Chen, feeling a bit embarrassed. Lu Chen looked at her and smiled. He also picked up the other roasted loach and took a few bites. After a while, he spat it out on the ground and said, "And it really doesn't taste good." Su Qingjun said with a smile, "It's probably because you brought it all the way from Kunwa City to the mountain. It's such a long journey, so it's probably already cold. Also, it's not too fresh, so the taste is a bit bad. Next time we have a chance, we should find some freshly made roasted loach. Maybe it'll taste better." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It has nothing to do with that. I remember when I was a kid, I occasionally ate this thing. Even if it was overnight, I still ate it until my mouth watered. This roasted loach didn't change, it was me who changed." On the edge of the cliff on Flying Goose Terrace, there was a moment of silence. The two of them didn't say anything. In the distance, the black dog's snorts could be heard. It seemed like it had run into the forest and caught something, so it was happily playing around. After a while, Su Qingjun smiled and said to Lu Chen, "In fact, isn't this a good thing? You've become a better person. It can't be that you want to go back to the bitter days you had when you were a kid, right?" Lu Chen smiled and nodded. "You're right. I've become a better person." He put away the snacks and said to Su Qingjun with a smile, "I wanted to let you eat something you've never eaten before to broaden your horizons and tease you. In the end, I messed it up. I'm so embarrassed. I've made a fool of myself in front of you." Su Qingjun hurriedly said, No. In fact, I'm also very happy because I've never eaten or even seen these things before." She seemed to be lost in thought as she spoke. Late at night, The flying goose terrace was silent. Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave. At this moment, she looked at the stone wall and saw only a patch of moonlight shining on the smooth stone, reflecting the cold radiance. The wooden house where Lu Chen lived was on the other side of Flying Goose Terrace, and it was closer to the edge of the cliff. At this moment, the moonlight fell on the wooden house and shone through the open window. It was late at night, but Lu Chen was still awake. Atsu was lying by his feet, curled up into a ball and asleep. Ever since it was seriously injured, whenever Atsu slept, as long as Lu Chen was by his side, it would definitely snuggle up to him. Lu Chen tried to chase it off the bed a few times, but Atsu would cling to him tenaciously every time. In the end, Lu Chen let it be. The night was bleak and the moonlight was cold. He put his hand behind his head as a pillow. His eyes were bright as he stared at the moonlight outside the window. He always seemed to be like this. In the dark night, as long as he didn't sleep, he would be abnormally awake. The bright moon hung high in the night sky, and was reflected in the depths of his eyes. It was like the shadow of the moon floating in the dark sea, faintly changing with a strange luster. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon. At this moment, the shape of the moon was no longer that of a full moon. Instead, it was slightly thinner. He calculated the time in his mind and then said to himself in a low voice, "There are still 24 days. In another 24 days, it would be the night of the next full moon." That day, in that mysterious forest, he found the mysterious pattern hidden under the bark of the tree, which revealed a code mark that only a few people in this world could understand. Meeting on the night of the full moon. That was the most simple meaning of it. It was an invitation from the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen understood it and received it. He didn't know whether it was good or bad, and he didn't know whether it was good or bad. All he could do was wait. Moreover, he didn't even tell old Ma about this matter. What would happen on the night of the next full moon? He silently looked at the moon. After a while, he suddenly got up and closed the window. On this day, He went down the mountain and went straight to Kunwa City to find the place where He Gang lived. The two brothers chatted in the room for a while. He Gang told his big brother about his harvest from the search for Zhu Sha. In the end, he said with a bit of shame, "Big brother, I'm really useless. I spent so much time and effort, but I still didn't find any suspicious people." He didn't look angry. He shook his head and said, "You don't need to think too much. This is all normal. The devil cult of the three realms has been opposing our righteous path's famous sects for many years, and has been hunted down and annihilated countless times. If it wasn't for some dirty tricks, I'm afraid they would have been eliminated by our righteous path seniors long ago. It doesn't matter if you can't find them." He Gang carefully looked at him and said, "Big brother, from what you said, could it be that you have some harvest in other places? I'm just afraid that if this drags on for too long, your master and sect head will become a bit impatient." He said, "It doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about this. In fact, I've already told them about this matter. The devil cult spy who can do such a big thing this time must have an extremely high position in the devil cult, and his cultivation must also not be low. Therefore, it can be imagined that he's hiding very deeply. It's very difficult to find him in a short time." Regarding this, the two masters both nodded. Moreover, on the surface, they also pretended to gradually forget about this matter, but in fact, they might be secretly trying to lure that scoundrel out again. "It'd be great if we could really catch that scoundrel," He Gang said hatefully. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. The Kunlun party has several thousand years of history. It won't let these scoundrels act so easily. Sooner or later we'll catch them. At that time, I'll help you plead with the two masters. In consideration of this contribution, maybe they can let you return to the Kunlun party." He Gang's body trembled. His ugly face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He suddenly stood up and said, "Really? Big brother, is this true?" He sighed and said, "You're my only younger brother. Why would I lie to you?" He Gang was overjoyed. He nodded repeatedly. For a moment, he seemed to be so excited that he couldn't speak. It was easy to imagine how important the Kunlun party was in his heart. Ever since he was a child, ever since he was sensible, he followed his big brother into the Kunlun party. In his heart, Kunlun Mountain was his home. Apart from this, there was no other place. It was precisely because of this that when he was kicked out of the Kunlun party after that accident, He Gang was completely disheartened and almost died numbly. Fortunately, in this world he still had a big brother who loved him the most. Soon after, he chatted with He Gang for a while and repeatedly warned him to be careful in Kunwa City. At least, before this important event, he shouldn't stir up any more trouble. He Gang naturally agreed one by one. Soon after, he told Hee about what he had seen and heard in Kunwa City during this period of time. The most important part was the scene where the Su clan's matter changed. From what he said, He Gang was very contemptuous of Su Qingjun. He indirectly hinted to his big brother that this woman was fickle and wasn't a good match for him. As for Lu Chun, this kind of unpresentable part-time disciple, He Gang didn't even feel like saying his name for fear of polluting his big brother's ears. After listening to what He said, he shook his head and said, "Although my friendship with Su Qingjun isn't deep, I don't think she's that kind of person." Anxious, He Gang promptly said, "Big brother, I saw it with my own eyes." He interrupted him and said while shaking his head, "You didn't see anything. It's just that Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. I know what to do about this matter. But for us brothers, Su Qingjun is just a passerby who has nothing to do with us. We don't need to curry favor with the Su family, but we also don't need to provoke them. Do you understand?" After a moment of silence, He Gang nodded and said, "Okay." He looked at his younger brother and softened his voice. He said, "Xiaojiang, I know you wholeheartedly want me to be well, but you don't have to be like this. We two brothers are actually the closest people in the world. To be honest, the only person I can trust with my life is you. I'll naturally deal with the other matters. You don't need to worry about me now. You just need to be yourself, okay?" He Gang nodded and said, "Yes, I understand, big brother. Don't worry." He smiled and patted He Gang's shoulder. He said, "When you return to Kunlun in the future, you and I will do great things together. The days ahead are still long. Who knows how far we can go in the future? Maybe we can even become the leader of Kunlun. Who knows?" He Gang laughed and nodded repeatedly. A trace of excitement flashed through his eyes. It was as if he was full of expectations and longing for the future. When he left, he did not make a sound. In order to not attract attention, he even changed into another set of clothes and covered his face. Then he left He Gang's house from another direction. However, after he gradually walked away, an honest-looking man who was pulling a cart suddenly walked out from a corner on the long street behind him. His blank and empty eyes looked in the direction that he had left. Then he turned around and walked in another direction. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, this man brought another person and stood in the same place. He first pointed at He Gang's house, then pointed at the long street that he had left from, and said a few words to him in a low voice. Standing beside him was a fat man. The fat man was Old Ma. Old Ma looked at the bustling street with people coming and going. He gently waved his hand. Then the unremarkable man who was pulling the cart beside him retreated. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the sea of people like a drop of water. Old Ma pursed his lips. He turned his head. His gaze seemed to be a little cold as he looked at the house. After a moment, he suddenly smiled again. His smile was cold. Chapter 183. The stars moved, the moon set, and the sun rose. Time passed quietly, and after a few more days, there were still 21 days until the next full moon. That morning, when Lu Chen opened the door and walked out of the wooden house, he saw a figure that he had not expected at all standing outside the house. He could not help but be surprised and said, "Why are you here?" On the flat ground of the Flying Goose platform, White Lotus was standing there, looking at the beautiful scenery around her, and said, "I did not expect this Flying Goose platform to have such scenery. It is really enviable. When will I be able to have such a cave abode?" Lu Chen snorted, walked over and stretched, then said, "Stop pretending. The strange peak you are on now is the real paradise, the immortal's secret realm. In the entire Kunlun party, only Yuanying Jinren has the right to set foot there. Would you care about a mere Flying Goose platform like this?" White Lotus smiled, and suddenly saw a black dog's head poking out from behind Luchin sneakily to look in their direction. White Lotus immediately laughed, and waved to Atsu, as if she was very happy and said, "Atsu, come here." Atsu looked at White Lotus, and without a word, shrank back, and hid in the room with its tail between its legs, without the slightest hesitation. White Lotus was stunned, and looked a little awkward on the spot. After a moment, she slowly put down her hand, then laughed dryly and said to Luchin, "This black dog does not seem to like me very much." Luchin also laughed, and said, "Although Atsu is stupid, sometimes it will have a flash of inspiration." White Lotus stared at him and said, "Are you mocking me?" Luchin did not intend to answer her, and only shrugged, then said, "Miss Bai, with your current status, I am afraid it is not appropriate for you to come to the Flying Goose platform so rashly, right?" Bai Lian said indifferently, "What's wrong with that? I don't think it's a big deal. Besides, although this is Su Qingjuan's residence, as long as I don't enter her residence, I can walk around the Flying Goose Terrace as I please. There's no way the Kunlun sect will forbid me from doing so." Of course, such a ban was impossible. The Flying Goose platform was beautiful, but it was really not a restricted area. It was just that most people in the sect respected Su Qingjun, so naturally they would not come here, so the Flying Goose platform became Su Qingjuan's private place. Of course, Luchin wouldn't argue with Bai Lian over this, so he simply waved his hand and said, "All right, don't waste your breath on me. Since you've come to the Soaring Goose Terrace, you must be looking for Su Qingjun, right? I will help you to call her." As he spoke, Luchin turned around, but a look of amusement flashed across his face. He thought to himself that it was still early. Once Su Qingjun was woken up, she would not be in a good mood. At that time, there might be a good show to watch. Unexpectedly, White Lotus stopped Luchin and said, "No need to go. I am not here to look for her. I am here to look for you." Luchin stopped in his tracks, and after a soft sigh, he turned around and looked at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at him with a smile that was not a smile, and there seemed to be some slyness in her expression. Luchin shook his head and walked over. At the same time, he softened his voice, and said with a bitter smile, "I say, didn't we agree before that well water does not interfere with the river water does not interfere with the well water does not interfere with the river water? You are now a noble disciple of a true monarch, and you also have a 5-pillar bone that is rarely seen in 1,000 years. With such a noble identity, the entire Kunlun party has to coax and flatter you. You suddenly came to find a useless odd-job disciple like me. What do you want me to do? If someone knows something, I am afraid that there will be countless people coming to investigate me tomorrow." White Lotus laughed and said, "Why are you very afraid of being investigated?" Luchin asked in reply, "Then are you afraid?" White Lotus did not speak. After a while, Luchin said, "So it is better for us not to have any contact. You live your good life, and I will drag out my life to be my odd-job disciple. Isn't that good for both of us?" White Lotus looked at him and said, "Originally, I also thought so. I have never been bothered to care about your matters. But there is one thing that I must ask you clearly." Luchin frowned and said, "What is it?" White Lotus stared at his eyes and said, "Do you know the blood-feeding technique that is passed down among the shamans of the southern barbarian tribes?" Luchin was startled, and then his eyebrows relaxed. It seemed that he had thought of many things in an instant, and also figured out the reason for White Lotus's sudden visit today. But on the surface he still shook his head, and then replied with abnormal firmness, "I don't know." White Lotus pointed to the wooden house, and said, "But I feel the traces of the blood-feeding technique from that dog." Luchin almost did not have the slightest hesitation and directly said, "You are wrong." White Lotus looked at Luchin for a long time, and after a while suddenly smiled and said, "I feel that you are becoming more and more interesting. It seems that you are hiding more secrets than me." Luchin's eyes flashed and said with a smile, "If that is the case, how about we make a deal? What do you say?" White Lotus' face that seemed to be innocent and flawless, at this moment, looked like the smartest and cunning fox in the world. Luchin said, "Secrets for secrets. You tell me a secret, and I will tell you a secret. This way, everyone will be comfortable. How about it?" White Lotus thought for a while, and said, I don't feel too good. You look honest and sincere, but in fact, you are full of evil tricks. I don't trust you. Luchin sneered and said, Hey, I am not familiar with you, so don't randomly accuse me. White Lotus smiled and said, Others can't see it, but how can I not know? In the past, you lied to that Exian girl. And now you are going to lie to this Su Qingjun, right? Luchin laughed and said, Your ability to accuse others is not bad. Could it be a powerful method that Hakushin Jinquan taught you? White Lotus pointed at Luchen's chest and said with a smile, You know in your heart that what I said is true. Otherwise, do you dare to swear that you have never lied to those two girls? After a pause, she said thoughtfully, and said, You are so treacherous. I feel that it is too dangerous to do business with you. I can't do it. Luchin laughed heartily, but his eyes looked a little cold. White Lotus came just like that, and after chatting with Luchin for a while, she left. Just as she said, she had no interest in Su Qingjun. It was just that the seemingly young girl, even after she left, still made Luchin frown and ponder for a long time. To be honest, he had seen many people in Kunlun, but the one who gave him the greatest pressure was not those powerful Jinren, but this little girl who was hiding in the shadows. On her body, there seemed to be countless secrets hidden in the darkness. Could it be that White Lotus was an evil sex spy? Luchin looked at White Lotus's receding figure, suddenly thought of this question, and then gave himself a fright. Recalling all the information that he knew about White Lotus, he thought about it and still felt that this little girl might be rebellious, might have a lot of secrets, but at such a young age, she was already shouldering a heavy responsibility. To enter a prestigious sect like Kunlun Party as a spy, she could not make any big mistakes. This kind of thing did not seem to be something that a little girl could do. Even if White Lotus looked young and mature, even if her talent was so outstanding. If it was possible, Luchin did not want to pay attention to White Lotus at all. He was just an ordinary odd-job disciple, and there was a world of difference between him and White Lotus. On the contrary, if the news that White Lotus was paying attention to him spread, it was equivalent to the entire Kunlun party starting to pay attention to him. This kind of situation, for a shadow, was simply a situation of absolute death. But if she was not a spy of the devil cult, how could Bai Lian's secret be explained? How could a little girl be able to display the secret sorcery of the southern barbarians? She was just a little girl. Everything seemed to be getting more and more confusing. After discovering that White Lotus had come to Flying Goose platform, Atsu had been obediently staying in the wooden house, and had no intention of going out. It seemed that they were particularly afraid of the little girl. It was only after White Lotus had left that Atsu seemed to suddenly breathe a sigh of relief, and its whole body relaxed. Luchin walked back to the wooden house and looked at Atsu. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was lost in thought. For the rest of the day, it returned to its original peaceful state. Luchin did his own work, and then at dusk, Su Qingjun came out for a walk. The two of them stood by the cliff for a while, chatting, and then before the sky turned dark, they each said their goodbyes and returned to their own houses and caves. The night was very dark, there were no stars or moon, only the cold wind blowing coldly, as if it was the so-called dark and windy night. Luchin sat quietly in front of the window, looking at the dark sky amidst the rustling pines, until midnight. It was already late at night. Everything on earth seemed to have fallen asleep. Even the mountains had fallen into a deep slumber. In the wooden house, Atsu curled up at his feet, sleeping quietly, looking exceptionally at ease. Luchin quietly stood up, his whole body suddenly slanted. He did not even open the wooden door and just strangely slid out of the window, and then turned over and closed the window. Under the night sky, he blended into the darkness, drifting away into the distance. That mysterious evil sex spy had left a mysterious symbol on the big tree in that forest, although Luchin could understand it, and guessed that it meant to meet on the night of the next full moon. But before that, he would not let go of other suspicious clues. Perhaps that symbol was just a trap with ulterior motives? Luchin, in his many years as a shadow, had long learned the instinct to not trust anyone. So when there were other suspicious points, he would not easily let it go. For example, that dark and mysterious righteous grave. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.